And we have one final bill. It's AB 659 by Nazarian, file item number 3. And while you're making your way down to present, we have one other bill that is vote only. It's AB 1279. Do we have a motion on that? Kristen, do you have a motion on the... Move to approve. Is there a second? Okay, can we, the chair has an opposed recommendation. Can we take a vote on that, please?
Buchanan?
No.
Buchanan, no. Olson?
Aye.
Olson, aye. Chavez?
Aye.
Chavez, aye. Gonzalez? Gonzalez, no. Nazarian?
No.
Nazarian, no. Weber?
No.
Weber, no. Williams?
No.
Williams, no.
Thank you. That bill fails. It's what, 2 to 5?
2 to 5. Yeah.
Okay. So, Nazarian, you can go ahead and present.
Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow members. I first and foremost accept the committee suggested amendments and would also like to list Assembly Member Achajian as a principal co-author, as well as Assembly Member Wilk and Senator Weiland as co-authors of this bill. AB 659 encourages the incorporation of an oral history component into teaching of human rights and genocides, including the Armenian, Cambodian, Darfurian, Rwandan, as well as the Holocaust. In the past 150 years, tens of millions of men, women, and children have lost their lives in genocides or mass atrocities throughout the world. California is home to the largest number of refugees and immigrants in the U.S., many of whom are genocide survivors or descendants of genocide survivors who can provide firsthand testimony on their experiences. And we've benefited off of that knowledge in these very chambers by having Holocaust survivors and genocide survivors come in and stand before us and be acknowledged. AB 659 will educate students on the struggles faced by survivors living in our communities. It is important that our students learn that genocides are a very tragic fact of international history. Oral history components provide our students with the benefit of understanding the trials and tribulations of genocide survivors through firsthand testimony. Students will learn of man's inhumanity to man and be better aware to make sure that future genocides do not occur. I respectfully ask for your aye vote and would also like to take the opportunity to introduce Haik Bagdasarian on behalf of the Armenian National Committee of America, Western Region, who's here to testify. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Haik Bagdasarian, and I appear before you today to speak in support of this bill on behalf of the Armenian American community of California. I'd like to touch on 3 points. The first is to commend you for recognizing Turkey's transparent attempt to distract you by engaging in genocide denial campaigns. The second is to stress the significance of the Armenian genocide in 20th century history. And third, to take note of the fact that this legislation isn't a departure from existing policy with respect to genocide education, but simply further codifies those policies. With respect to genocide denial, it's not necessary to engage in a debate with deniers. I can tell you unequivocally that there is no question as to the truth. The only issue of controversy is with respect to the legal consequences of those genocidal acts. And at the end of the day, that's what denial is about, the fear of reprisal. With respect to the significance of the Armenian genocide, scholars will tell you that there is a clear nexus between the Holocaust and Armenian genocide which precipitated it. Adolf Hitler notoriously said immediately before setting the Holocaust in motion in 1939, "Who remembers the annihilation of the Armenians today?" It can be inferred from this and other factors that the Holocaust and subsequent genocides cannot be fully understood by our children if they don't understand the Armenian genocide. Third and last is the fact that the legislature and the Board of Education have consistently included the Armenian genocide. In fact, it is in the history social sciences curriculum framework, which provides as follows in part: students should learn of the Ottoman government's planned mass deportation and systematic annihilation of the Armenian population in 1915. They should examine the effects of the genocide on the remaining Armenian people who were deprived of their historic homeland and the ways in which it became a prototype of subsequent genocides. So the only thing that this bill will do is to bring the education code closer in line to the existing framework and content standards. And furthermore, it will shed some light on the genocides of Cambodia, Rwanda, and Darfur. Once again, I urge you to support this bill, and I thank you for your time. And if possible, I'd like to submit my statement for the record.
That'll be fine. You can give it to the sergeants, and they will provide it to us. Are there any other witnesses in support? Are there any witnesses in opposition?
Thank you, Madam Chair and member of the committee. My name is Karahan Mete. I'm a president of the Turkish Peace and Justice Committee. They asked us, Ron Paul, why you are voting no for every bill? He replied, I read them. And my question is, did you read this bill? This is outrageous bill. We are going to get this somebody in our classroom beside the teacher to testify. Here, 46 Turkish diplomats has been killed by the Armenians, 3 of them in California. These kids who took the gun, the young kids, killed the Turks because this was just Turkish. Because they had been brainwashed with the elders to do this crime. And now we are going to allow these people go in our class, tell this story. What kind of story they are expecting to tell? This horror story? Well, our education system said this, the material should be right and on this. I give you some example that when I say this Turkish, I give you the Turkish argument. This is the way, Turkish way to doing it. But I give you this argument that Armenians, writers and historians, they wrote a book. You can find it in the book. For example, this one of Hocalık massacre. It's not this 1940 and 1992. Armenian journalist Davut Karahan, he wrote in his book, group named Gavlan was in charge of burning these Azerbaijani victims. March 2nd, 1 kilometer west of the Hocalı, first truck dumped over 100 dead bodies of Azerbaijanis. A little 10-year-old girl came with the last truck. She had a wound on her head and her arm. Her face was purple. Against cold and hungry, she was alive and her breathing was shallow. She was shivering. Her eyes was wide open and she was terrifyingly looking around. At that time, a soldier named Tigarian grabbed her and threw her into fire with other bodies. I heard her screaming, but there was nothing I could do. I returned to Suisha, and they kept fighting. Name of the cross, page 62, 63. And we want those people come to our class, and tell the story. That's what I would tell. What we're going to tell them. In the other story, that's this same thing, same people. Today still is a higher official in Armenia. Zori Balayan, they would know it. His his book is named Revival of Soul, 1996, page 260, 262. When I and Kachatur entered the house Our soldier had nailed 13-year-old Turkish child to the window. He was making much noise, so Kachatur put her mother's cut breast into her mouth. I skinned his chest and belly. 7 minutes later, the child died. And I did the same 3 Turkish children, and then he went to the church for forgiveness. That's what he's saying there. I mean, this 7-year-old kid that gonna listen to the horror story that happens somewhere around the world, it's gonna give them the scar. I mean, they cannot. That's not a history. It's just a terrifying stuff. We can fight each other. We can have a black eyes, but just leave the kids alone. My goal is just stop this in the perpetuation as the hatred for the next generation. That's my whole goal is. And they brainwash their kids, and they want to brainwash your daughters or your grandkids. The Armenian kids, and still today, they go into Gurgen Yanıkyan. Gurgen Yanıkyan has killed 2 Turkish ambassadors in California. And he invited them to the dinner, lunch, and he shot them. While one of them was still dying, he lit a cigarette. And today, and Dukmechian, and pardon him later on. And today, Armenian kids going to his graveyard as represent him as a hero. I mean, it's outrageous things. I understand they're angry, but just leave the kids alone. And I would like to answer, if you give us a few times about this. He said the Armenian genocide
No,
is...
we're not engaging
don't have
in
a
a
time.
we're speaking to the merits of the bill, and if you could conclude your remarks, and it looks like we have another person to speak in opposition, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, because he told us the Armenian genocide is fact. And I want to just tell you one paragraph from this Armenian president. Armenian president, that's Turkish. And here. The former Armenian Prime Minister Kazatsuni, when he addressed the Armenian Assembly Bucharest, July 1923, which is after the war. In the fall 1914, Armenian volunteer bands organized themselves and fought against the Turks because they could not refrain themselves from organizing and refrain themselves from fighting. This was an inevitable result of psychology on which the Armenian people had nourished itself during an entire generation. We had no doubt that the war would end with the complete victory of the Allies. Turkey would be defeated and dismembered, and its Armenian population would be at least liberated. There's no genocide here. In order to call
Could I ask you to conclude your remarks?
Okay.
We normally allow 2 minutes, and I think we've been
Okay, I'm
very
done.
liberal in
I
the
have
amount of time.
one more sentence.
No,
In order to call this something the genocide, you have to have the international court order. There's the United Nations resolutions, and the United States has been, Ronald Reagan signed this bill. And it's a law in this United States. And if in order to have to be called a genocide and have to be in this court ruling, so far Armenian has applied a court from Europe and United States. They all fail, all reject. I asked you this.
Thank you.
On this.
And do we have one other witness to speak in opposition? Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable committee members, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm here before you as a California resident, taxpayer, and a proud Turkish American. I would like to share with you my objection to the amendment AB 659. World War I was a horrible time. Many horrible things happened. Many people died. Many more suffered as a consequence of this horrible war. Many people lost their humanity along the way, and many others lost their lives and loved ones. Turks and Armenians, after living hundreds of years together as neighbors, they became enemies almost overnight. They killed each other. They killed each other's families. Neighbors killed neighbors, sometimes even each other's children and elderly parents. This is not something we can be proud of. There is no disagreement that this was a murderous and a very dark period in history. However, genocide, as I understand it, is a narrowly defined legal notion that applies only to crimes against humanity tried and convicted in a competent tribunal. As recent as last month, European Court of Human Rights has shared this determination. To their judgment, genocide is not determined to be fair, provable, or accurate term for this dark and highly disputed set of tragic events. As a Turkish American, I feel great sadness, sorrow, and empathy for the sufferings of my Armenian countrymen and women and their descendants. I feel great sadness that after 100 years, we still live in our pain and animosity towards each other. However, even with the best intentions, or worse, under political pressure, if you were to pass this amendment and allow only a version of disputed history for our kids to study at school, you will not be doing any favors to Armenian Americans or Turkish Americans, and most importantly, to the kids in California. I grew up in Turkey and studied at Turkish schools until college. I know what it is like to be educated in one version of history, only to find out there's a whole different sad story, painful story on the other side. Please do not subject Californian kids to such environment. Let kids debate the facts openly. Know it is disputed. Know the events are not determined to be genocide by a competent tribunal. However, also know that this does not make these events any less horrible for those who died and survived it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses, either in support or opposition to this bill? Are there any comments from members?
I'd like to thank you for coming here to make your comment, sir. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but the second speaker. I'd just like to highlight some of the points. This is not for 7-year-old class age students. This is a 10th grade class of world history, culture, and geography. So we're talking about high school students. So they're an older group. And actually, when we look through the history of this, what we're teaching our children, having been around the world quite a few times as a Marine and having actually served with Turkish military, and also with Japanese military and Egyptian military and Israeli, I could go on for another 20 countries, and somewhat of a student of history going around. The sad part about our mankind is that we do have these tragedies. We could even talk about the United States and how we treated Native Americans. In World War II, how we treated our own citizens who are Japanese, who are here for many generations, who we built this country, or Chinese. And I would venture to say, 10 years from now, somebody's going to be here from Afghanistan or Iraq, or is going to be talking about what we're going to be teaching our kids about the tragedies that are going in right now, or even in Syria. So I'm sure what the salient message is going to be taught with all our children in school at 10th grade is that the history of man has been very violent, and that The only way that we can go forward as a free society in the United States is that we recognize the value of everybody, and that we are not just tolerant, but actually loving of other cultures and societies. Because if we're not, then things like what we're talking about at DAF or Turkish and Armenian, that will be our future, and that's not what we want. The intent, the way I read this, the reason I second it is because what we want our children to understand is that our history of mankind is very violent. And you can all go back to Christianity and what we did with, in the Dark Ages. I mean, the history of man has been very violent. And the only way we're going to change that is if we as a society start recognizing our history, not trying to sugarcoat it, say what it is, and deal with each other, and at the end of the day, love each other. So as with the understanding of educating our children, is why I seconded this, I'll stay with this and support it. And having known the Assembly member, Mr. Nazarian, I'm sure he has the same feeling about loving his neighbor and being accepting of others. But I want to tell you, so I hear what you're saying. I understand deeply what you're talking about, being brought up in Turkish and getting one side of it. And what we're trying to do here in the United States, and especially in California, is not to have one side of it. Sir.
I appreciate both of you who've come, and I appreciate Mr. Nazarian and those of you who bring this issue forward. I spent 41 years at the university teaching ethnic studies and trying to make sure that our students had a complete understanding of history, not only the good, but also the sometimes very challenging and difficult. And I've spent probably before coming here the last 10 years before arriving here taking students around the world, particularly to Africa, and looking at the challenges faced in these nations, particularly in the areas where the countries were colonized, people were brutalized, lost their lives, lost their resources, and the challenges faced. And probably the most tragic experience I've had was always with our students who had such little information about the world, such little information about what was happening in other countries, what other challenges were there, and sometimes very little information they had about the role of the United States in the tragedies around the world. And oftentimes it was an eye-opener for those students, but it was really a very necessary piece of information that they needed to have. I've had people ask me recently about the new film, 12 Years a Slave, and is that appropriate for people to see, for young people to see? And I say most definitely, because they need to understand how challenging this country has been, how challenging the world has been for people who are just simply trying to create a life for themselves. And only, I found, and with my students in South Africa and my students at the university, only when they get the complete history do they really understand the responsibility they have to prevent these atrocities in the future, that they have the power to do that, and when they don't, when they're silent about it, what it means not only immediately but long-term in terms of its impact on people and society and the world. And so, when we talk about educating our high school students, and I did run a program in high schools for many years called Diamonds in the Rough, and it was about teaching ethnic history to these students. I found that my students in high school were just amazed at the tremendous amount of history they did not have, that they did not know even about this country. And so we don't do a great job in educating our young people. And so anytime we have an opportunity to expand that base, to give them some information, and to challenge them to question it too, and to ask questions and to research and understand it, we really increase our chances of never repeating the same mistake again. Whenever I leave South Africa, I always go through the Holocaust, the museum. And at the end of the museum, there's you pass by this place and you pick up this rock and you cast it into this huge place with lots of rocks. And you always say one thing when you leave, never more. Never more that you will allow this to happen or be a part of it again. And I think that's important. And so I appreciate your comments. I think the information you present is good. Your efforts that we want to protect our young people from knowing all these things, but really protecting them is not really the best way to educate them. They need to know the good, the bad, the ugly, the questionable, the challenging, in order to really be the young people that we think we want to have who can prevent these atrocities from happening in the future. So I appreciate all your comments. I look forward to this. I think looking at the issues of genocide and the tragedies around the world are challenging for all of us. The Rwanda situation is very challenging for us as a country that did very little and see such tragedy. And we see the same thing happening now in Central Africa and the challenges that are there for individuals. And it is really something that we have to grapple with as a society of individuals who are trying to figure out our place in the world and the role we play in preventing the atrocities that exist now and the ones that have existed in the past. So I commend you and I support this bill.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? My comments are brief. We can't deny history. And there is a difference between the legal definition of a word and the meaning of a word in its historical content. And when we teach history, we're talking about the meanings of words in historical context. Genocide is already woven throughout the curriculum in grades 7 through 12. What this bill does is it encourages a thoughtful and deliberate consideration by the curriculum experts, people who are charged with presenting a fair, balanced perspective on history throughout our curriculum and our text. It charges them with the people from the Department of Education, from school districts, from professional development providers, and our Instructional Quality Commission. It encourages them to include these genocides as part of the curriculum. And I think my two colleagues, Assemblymember Chavez and Assemblymember Weber, were very eloquent in their remarks because it has happened. It will continue to happen. I don't think necessarily they're the acts of individual citizens of our countries. Too often they're the acts of leaders who don't value and respect life in the same way all of us do. But I think it's critically important that this be part of our history. So with that, Senator Nazarian, if you would like to make any closing remarks before we have a motion, a second, before we take a vote, I'd like to give you the opportunity.
Thank you. I think the combination of the three of you speaking have said more eloquently than anything I can say to close. So I thank you, and with that, I just ask you for a vote.
Thank you. We have a motion, a second. The chair's recommend is support, and the motion is to pass to appropriations.
Buchanan?
Aye.
Buchanan, I. Olson? Aye. Olson, I. Chavez? Aye. Chavez, I. Gonzalez? Aye. Gonzalez, I. Nazarian?
Yes.
Nazarian, I. Weber?
Aye.
Weber, I. Williams? Aye. Williams, I.
Thank you. Your bill is out,
Thank you.
7-0. And I believe we are done. We have one bill, a vote-only bill, AB 815, that, Mr. Chavez, I think you need to add on. It's a vote-only Conway. Okay. And
Chavez, 815, I.
great. Thank you. The meeting's adjourned.
Do you want to add on, Mr. Chavez, to the consent calendar?